Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, we are from Group 3. We'll be presented our discussion that is about terms used in critical analysis of poetry. But before that, let me introduce our group member first. With me, my name is Nabila Vinilamanda, and the other is Sally Mursalina, Juliana Antonia, and Anggita Rizky Deborah. And in the next slides is about a basic dictionary of important terms used in poetry analysis. So nothing could be more essential in the analysis of poetry. The critic must be able to describe the properties of a poem just as a constructor might be described those of a house. In order to do this, one must have some knowledge of certain central terms used when discussing poetry. And in the next slide is about abstract. So abstract itself means related to the term abstraction, which is the process of selecting certain qualities out of many. In the process of abstraction, we choose various specific qualities to represent one large concept. Ideas in poetry are presented in terms of these specific qualities representing the large concept. They're sometimes almost like suggestion of ideas rather than ideas themselves. So the abstract is also the opposite of the concrete, the conceptual. So next slide is about allegory and alliteration. So allegory itself is about a prolonged metaphor. An allegory is a literary statement presenting its meaning in a valid way. The literary meaning is a metaphor for the real meaning. So allegory, in short, is simply one thing consistently being present in the guise of something else. In allegory, there is usually a series of actions, which are in fact symbolic of other actions. And next is about alliteration. So alliteration itself is the repetition of the same sound at the beginning of several words which are near one another. The most commonly known example of alliteration is the old jingle about Peter Piper picking a pig of pickled peppers. The string of P sounds give a rhythmical enchanting effect. Next slide. So allusion. So allusion itself is the process of referring to figures or events in life or in literature that are well known. Both this process of referring to another thing and particular figure, event, and etc., as named in the poem, are called allusions. So, for example, if in a line of poetry we were to see the word job, we would call it a biblical allusion. And we could also refer to the poet allusion to the people. So allusion in the simply words, or in other words, is another word for reverence. And next is have ambiguity. So ambiguity is the attempt to create mystery by suggesting several meanings and not making one more outstandingly correct than the others. So a poet will say something in an ambiguous way in order to challenge the reader. The poet wants the reader to have some difficulty determining what it means. By suggesting several meanings, this process is inevitably magnified. Next is about antithesis. So it means that results when a pair or more of strongly contrasting terms are presented together. If words, ideas, or clauses are widely divergent but present together, there is a certain amount of resulting tension which makes the line highly provocative. And then it's atmosphere and baroque. So atmosphere itself is the general tone and mood of a work of art. An aesthetic atmosphere is created, for example, when the artist deliberately tries to evoke certain geographical association in our minds. There is usually a group of words within a poem which collectively establish an atmosphere. If the poet used description of large waves, threatening sea, threatening rain, and etc., it will obviously have created an atmosphere of storminess. So creating an atmosphere of love or of hate, for example, can be an extremely challenging artistic problem. So the next is Baroque. So Baroque is a style of composition which is extremely ornate. The term was originally used to describe 17th century architecture buildings, strictly ornate and embellished. This decor, however, is not accidentally or even unordered. Although not necessarily a weakness, in recent time, Baroque style is usually criticized. The students of poetry on the whole will not have particularly large research to the term, but should understand it when encountered reading literary criticism. So the next slide will be explained by my partner.
Pathos results when an attempt at creating pathos fails, and laughter rather than pity is created, or when the poet labors exhaustively to illustrate something which is so trivial that it is not worthy of his or her efforts. Cacophony, the appearance of widely differing and inharmonious sounds in close conjunction. The next is cliff, a hackneyed or outward expression or word. A phrase, word, or idea becomes, through repeated use, very familiar and consequently less striking and interesting, even less meaningful. Connotations. What of the various implications or associations that a word carries? Conceit. A difficult, challenging, or highly provocative metaphor or symbol. The next is consecrate, the opposite of the abstract. It represents what is real rather than what is ideal. Conventional, whatever is generally accepted or agreed upon. It is a custom which has, over a long period of time, been given wide sanctions. Denotations, the essential meaning of the word. The denotative meanings of a word is thus void of any emotional or subjective overtones. Diction, the use of words in poetry. The didactics, designed to teach. It is, of course, possible to say that all poetry, after all, is designed to teach something. However, we reserve the expressions didactic poetry to refer to that poetry which is specifically want to communicate moral or ethical instruction. The next is doctrinaire, a poet or poem which is being doctrinaire is if every poem that someone writes states the themes and nuance of his or her particular philosophy. Epithet, the praise which is used to capture the most outstanding characteristic about a person or object. Euphemism, a figure of speech which veils the obvious word with another, less direct one. Euphony, in other words, euphony results when the poet has selected sounds which are compatible and harmonious. Explications. An explication is a full of account, a complete description of a poem or a passage of literature. Figurative language. In general, figurative language is that kind of language which differs from the language employed in the traditional literal ways of describing persons or objects.
And then foreshadowing, it is the method of giving hint in advance of what is to come later. And then form is the organization of the parts of a poem into the whole. If a poem has 14 lines, it is said to have the forms of a sonnet. And then from frame of reference, It is the background of a poem. We consider a poem in context or within a frame of reference. And then hyperbole, it is a figure of speech which employs exaggeration. And then image. Image is a fanciful or imaginative description of people or objects that's stated in the terms of our senses. Then irony, it is the result from contrast between the actual meaning of a word or a statement and the suggestions of another meaning. And then lyrical referred originally to lyric poetry, that is, to poetry written to be sung to a lyre. And then meaning, when we talk about the meaning of a poem, we are talking primarily about the significance of its message. Next is metaphor. Metaphor is the figure of speech which compares one thing to another directly. It describes an object or action in a way that isn't literally true but helps explain an idea or make comparison. Basically, metaphor is used in poetry in order to add some color to the language. For example, if we say you are my sunshine, it doesn't mean that you are the sun that's shining in the sky, but this metaphor describes how the person is happy and bright, just like the sun. Another example is the world is a stage. This metaphor is used to say that people's lives are full of drama because so many things happen, and it's comparing the world to theater stage. And then metonymy. Metonymy is the substitution of a word closely associated with another word in the place of that other word. Simply, it is a figure of speech in which one object or idea takes the place of another with that it has a close association, and in fact, it means the change of name. As a literary device, it is a way of replacing an object or idea with something related to it instead of stating what is actually meant. This figure of speech enables the writers to express a word in different way by using a closely related word. Therefore, this is a method for the writers to vary their expression and produce an effect for the reader. For example, the word academics represent associations with school, college, university, classes, or studying. Another example is when I came to visit my friend, he offered me a cup. And then the word cup here is a metonymy for beverage such as coffee, tea, or milk. Mood is the creation of an atmosphere through the proliferation of certain common emotions. For example, if everyone in a poem is sad, there is a mood of sadness dominating the atmosphere or world of poem. And then motif. Motif is a core experience around which an entire poem or work of literature can be developed. A motif is very similar to theme, which explains the basic center of the meaning. Then objective. When we make an objective appraisal of work of art, we are considering what is factual and devoid of personal interpretation. In objectivity, we find a little emotions or personal dissertation of the meaning. Then paradox. Paradox is the result when a poet presents a pair of ideas, word, image, which are or appear to be self-contradictory. Or simply, paradox is a statement that contradicts itself or that must be both true and untrue at the same time. Then parallelism. Parallelism is a principle advocating that ideas of equal importance or significance should be treated at equal length within a poem. Then parody. Parody is imitating the work of others in order to amuse. Parody emphasizes the obvious characteristics for the sake of humor. And then pathos. Pathos is the aspect of certain poems which produce in the reader a response of pity and sorrow. And then periphrasis is a roundabout method of saying something. It's such an extremely indirect method of saying something that is used carefully, and it can produce very humorous results. And then persona is the character in a poem or play, but more specifically, it is the voice of narrator character in the poem, and this voice is created by the poet, and it's not the voice of the poet. And then personification. Personification is the process of assigning human characteristics to non-human objects, abstractions, or ideas. For example, in this sentence, the piece of chocolate cake is calling my name. From that sentence, we know that chocolate cake doesn't have the ability to call after someone. But here, it uses personification to express the feeling of desire and hunger. And then poetic license, it is the poet's license or privilege to do something unorthodox in the terms of diction, rhyme, and or matter. And then point of view, it is quite literally refers to the way in which the author views his subjects, such as from what point is his view, or from what angle is he observing his subject, etc. And then ritual, it is the form of conducting worship of one kind or another, also any ceremonial and often repeated action. And then sarcasm, it usually means or vicious antagonism, and it is not as clever as verbal irony. When one is sarcastic, then one is making an attack on someone or something. And the satire, it is the technique of holding human vices, stupidities, and etc. up for contempt, usually with aim to reform. It is usually directed at ideas, institutions, or governments rather than at individuals. And then sensibility, it is a word which has undergone a series of changes in meaning. And then simile, it is a direct comparison between things which are not particularly similar in their essence. It usually uses connecting words such as like or as. For example, he is as busy as B. This means he is working hard, as bees are known to be extremely busy. And then subjective, it is private, personal, emotional, or individual. When one reads any poem, then another makes certain subjective responsive to the poem. This is because every reader has different experiential background. And then synecdoche, it is a particular form of metaphor. The technique of this uses a part in order to signify the whole. And the last is theme. It is the central concept that developed in a poem. It's the basic idea which the poet is trying to convey. Okay, I think that's all from our groups. Thank you for watching.